No one from my family showed up to my wedding, not my parents, not my sister, not even a single relative who had once promised they would never miss a moment like that. And I remember standing there in my dress, watching empty chairs that were supposed to be filled with people who claimed to love me, trying to smile through it while guests whispered and checked their phones, wondering if something had gone wrong, but nothing had gone wrong, because at that exact moment my entire family was boarding a flight across 12 states to celebrate my sister instead, laughing, taking photos, posting captions about how family always comes first, as if I did not exist at all, as if my wedding was something they could simply skip without consequence. And the worst part was not even their absence, it was the realization that this was not an accident, it was a choice, a very clear one, and I was not the one they chose. If you have ever felt like you were the only one standing alone while everyone else moved on without you, then stay with me, and only if this story truly resonates with you, consider liking, subscribing, and share where you are watching from, your city, your country, and what time it is for you right now, because I always wonder how far stories like this travel and who out there understands this kind of silence. My name is Emily Harper, I am 31 years old, and that night, the night of my own wedding, was the moment I realized my family had already decided I did not matter, and what happened in the weeks after that would change everything I thought I knew about them forever. But to understand why they made that choice, you have to go back to the weeks leading up to that day, back to the quiet signs I ignored, the small conversations that did not feel right at the time but make perfect sense now, because none of this started at the wedding, it started long before, in the subtle ways they treated me like I was always second, always the one expected to understand, to adjust, to step aside when something or someone else mattered more. And I convinced myself that it was temporary, that families go through phases, that things would balance out eventually, but looking back, now I can see it clearly, the pattern was already there, I just did not want to believe it. And by the time I stood there in that empty room, smiling for photos that would never include them, it was already too late to pretend I did not see the truth anymore. In the days leading up to the wedding, there were moments that should have warned me, small things that did not make sense at the time but now feel impossible to ignore, like how my mother kept saying she might not be able to stay for the full ceremony because of travel complications, even though she had known the date for over a year, or how my father avoided every conversation about walking me down the aisle, changing the subject with a polite smile that felt rehearsed. And then there was my sister, who suddenly became distant in a way that was subtle enough to overlook, replying late to messages, skipping calls, always busy with something she never fully explained, and I told myself it was normal, that weddings bring stress, that everyone was just overwhelmed, but deep down there was a quiet discomfort I chose not to listen to, because believing the truth would have meant accepting something I was not ready to face. A few days before the ceremony, I saw a photo posted online. My sister standing in front of a departure gate, smiling with a suitcase beside her, the caption simple, "Big week ahead." And I remember pausing for a second, trying to connect the dots, because no one had mentioned any trip, no one had said anything about leaving town, and when I asked my mother about it, she brushed it off, saying it was nothing important, just a quick visit somewhere that would not interfere with my wedding, and I believed her, or at least I pretended to, because it was easier than questioning everything. But the night before my wedding, my phone felt unusually quiet, no messages from my parents, no last-minute check-ins, no excitement, just a stillness that felt out of place for something that was supposed to be one of the most important moments of my life. And I sat there in my apartment, surrounded by details I had spent months planning, the dress hanging carefully by the window, the seating chart printed and ready, names of family members placed where they were supposed to sit, and I remember staring at those names longer than I should have, wondering why it suddenly felt like they did not belong there. And even then I did not let myself fully understand what was happening. I told myself they would show up, that they had to, because missing something like this would not make sense, not for a family, not for people who had always said they cared. But the truth is, by the time the morning arrived and my phone remained silent, I already knew, not consciously, not in a way I could admit out loud, but in that quiet space where instinct lives, I knew that something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. And when I walked into that venue later that day, greeting guests with a smile that felt heavier with every passing minute, I realized that the absence I was about to face was not sudden. It had been building for a long time, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a moment where it could no longer be ignored. By the time the ceremony ended, I had stopped looking at the door completely, not because I had accepted their absence, but because I understood it. And there is a difference between those two things. One comes from peace, the other comes from clarity. And what I felt in that moment was not peace, it was a quiet realization settling into place, something steady and undeniable. My family had made a decision, and I had been on the losing side of it. I remember smiling for photos, thanking guests, moving through the reception as if everything was normal, because sometimes holding yourself together is not about pretending. It is about choosing not to fall apart in front of people who would not understand anyway. And somewhere between the speeches and the music, someone showed me a post just casually like it was nothing, a video clip of my parents and my sister standing in an airport laughing, pulling suitcases behind them, the caption bright and simple, "Off to celebrate something special." And I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I needed confirmation, but because seeing it made everything real in a way that words never could. They had not just missed my wedding, they had replaced it, they had chosen another moment, another person, another priority, and they had done it without hesitation, without explanation, without even considering what it would mean for me. And in that moment something inside me shifted, not loudly, not in a way anyone else could see, but enough to change the way I understood everything that came before it, because suddenly the pattern was clear, the missed calls, the vague answers, the distance. It was never about being busy, it was about where I stood in their lives. And I was not where I thought I was somewhere far behind, somewhere optional, somewhere they could step away from without consequence. And that was the part that stayed with me long after the night ended. Not the embarrassment, not the whispers, not even the empty seats, but the realization that I had been adjusting my expectations for years to fit into a space that was never truly mine. And as I drove home later that night, still in my dress, the city lights passing quietly outside the window, I did not cry, I did not call anyone, I did not even check my phone, because for the first time I did not feel the need to ask them why. I already knew the answer. And the more important question had become something else entirely, what I was going to do with that truth now that I could no longer ignore it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had rested, but because something inside me had already shifted into a different rhythm, one that did not need closure from anyone else, one that was no longer waiting for explanations that would never come. And for the first time in a long time, I did not reach for my phone immediately, I did not check for missed calls or messages, because I already knew there would be nothing there that mattered. And when I finally did unlock the screen, it confirmed exactly that: silence, no apologies, no attempts to explain, just a few distant notifications that had nothing to do with the people who were supposed to be closest to me. And that silence said more than any words could have. It told me that they were comfortable with what they had done, that from their perspective there was nothing to fix, nothing to address, and that was the moment I stopped expecting anything different from them. I moved through the apartment slowly, still surrounded by remnants of the wedding, flowers beginning to wilt, unopened gifts stacked neatly by the wall, details that had been meant to mark a beginning but now felt like quiet reminders of something else entirely. And instead of feeling overwhelmed by it, I began to see it differently, not as evidence of what I had lost, but as a clear line between what was real and what was not, because the truth is, the people who had shown up, even if they were few, had been present in a way that mattered, and the ones who had not, had made their priorities unmistakably clear. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider something I had never fully accepted before, that I did not need to keep proving my place in a family that had already decided where I belonged. Later that day, I came across something I had not paid attention to before. A series of transactions and shared accounts that connected me more closely to my family than I realized. Small financial ties, recurring payments, contributions I had been making without thinking twice, things that had always felt normal, expected, part of being supportive. And as I looked at them now, with everything that had just happened, they did not feel normal anymore. They felt one-sided, unbalanced, like a system that had quietly depended on me without ever acknowledging it. And I sat there for a long moment, not angry, not even surprised, just aware, because awareness changes everything. It shifts your perspective from questioning yourself to understanding the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. I did not make any sudden decisions, I did not call anyone, I did not announce anything, because I understood that real change does not need to be loud to be effective, it only needs to be consistent. And so I began with something simple. I started to separate what was mine from what had been shared. Not out of spite, not as a reaction, but as a choice, a quiet, deliberate step toward a life that was no longer shaped by their expectations. And as I made those changes one by one, I realized that what they had taken from me that night was not just presence, it was clarity. And now that I had it back, I was no longer willing to give it away again. It started quietly, the way real consequences always do, not with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden collapse, but with a shift so subtle that no one noticed it at first except me. I stopped sending money, not all at once, not in a way that would draw attention, but gradually, intentionally, the small transfers that had become routine, the shared expenses I had covered without question, the things that had always felt like part of being a good daughter, a supportive sister. I simply let them And for a while nothing happened, or at least nothing visible, because people who are used to relying on something do not immediately recognize when it is gone. They assume it will return, they expect the pattern to continue, but patterns only hold when both sides maintain them, and I had already stepped out of it. Days passed, then weeks, and somewhere around the third week the first message came, casual at first. My mother asking if everything was okay, mentioning a bill that had not gone through, framing it as a technical issue rather than a question, and I responded simply, telling her everything on my end was fine because it was. I did not offer more, I did not explain, I did not fill the silence the way I used to. And that was when the tone began to change. The messages became more frequent, less casual, more direct. My father reaching out, asking if I had adjusted something, if I could check on it, if I could fix it, and I read every message without responding right away, not to ignore them but to understand them, to see the shift happening in real time, because what they were experiencing was not confusion, it was loss of control, and that realization brought a kind of clarity I had never felt before. By the time it reached the fourth week, the calls started, first a few, then more, then enough that my phone would light up multiple times a day, and I let it ring, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because I no longer felt responsible for solving problems they had created by depending on me without respect. And then the messages changed again, no longer about bills or accounts, but about urgency, about things not working, about plans falling apart, about needing to talk. And that was when I understood the full picture. The support I had been providing was not just helpful, it had been essential, woven into their lives in a way they had never acknowledged until it was gone. And now that it was gone, they were facing something they had not prepared for, the reality of standing on their own without the safety net they had taken for granted. And still, I did not respond, because this was not a conversation that could be fixed with words. This was a consequence that needed to be felt. And as the number of missed calls grew, as the messages stacked up one after another, I found myself looking at my phone not with hesitation, not with guilt, but with a calm understanding that what was happening now was not something I had done to them. It was something they were experiencing because of the choices they had already made. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to sit in that space without trying to change it, without trying to make it easier for anyone else, because I finally understood that protecting my peace did not make me selfish, it made me free. In the weeks that followed, the noise slowly faded, not because the calls stopped immediately, but because I stopped letting them reach me in the same way. The messages became less frequent, the urgency replaced by something quieter, something uncertain, and eventually, the silence returned. But this time it felt different, not empty, not heavy, but peaceful, like a space I had finally claimed for myself. I moved forward with my life in ways that felt steady and intentional, building routines that did not revolve around fixing someone else's problems, surrounding myself with people who showed up without needing to be asked, and for the first time I understood what it meant to feel chosen, not because I had earned it, but because I was simply valued as I was, and that realization changed everything. I learned that love is not something you prove by sacrificing yourself, and family is not defined by who shares your name, but by who stands beside you when it matters most. And if you are listening to this and you have ever felt overlooked, replaced, or quietly dismissed by the people you trusted, I want you to know that your worth has never been dependent on their ability to recognize it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is step back and see clearly, to understand that being ignored is not a reflection of who you are, but of what they are willing to give. And you are allowed to choose a life where you are not an afterthought, where your presence is not optional. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening, for understanding in ways that not everyone can. It means more than I can explain, and I would love to know, have you ever had to walk away from people you thought would always be there? And what did you discover about yourself when you did? And if this story truly speaks to your heart, you can support it with a like or a subscription, but only if it feels right to you. My name is Emily Harper, I am 31 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this: you do not lose people who do not choose you, you find yourself.